He never expected to sign up for an evening literature course and find his life shifting in ways he couldn't have imagined. The class was supposed to be a distraction, a way to escape the monotony of his day job. But from the moment he walked into that quiet, warmly lit classroom, something changed. The woman at the front wasn't just another teacher. Miss Charlie had an elegance that didn't come from expensive clothes or jewelry, but from the way she carried herself, shoulders straight, chin slightly lifted, a gaze that seemed to look right through you and still leave you wanting more. Her voice, low and confident, had a faint rasp, as if she'd been telling stories her entire life. She wasn't young in the way girls his age were. She was experienced, poised. The fine lines at the edges of her eyes didn't hide her beauty, they deepened it. She looked like someone who knew things she would never put in a syllabus. The first few weeks went by with the usual lectures, poetry from the Romantic period, essays on interpretation, discussions about tone and style. But something about the way she called his name during roll, the way she lingered near his desk when she spoke to him, made him suspect that maybe she saw something in him too. One Thursday evening, after class had ended and the other students had filed out into the cool night air, she called his name again. "Stay a moment," she said, not looking up from the papers she was stacking. He hesitated, his hand halfway to his backpack strap. "Sure," he replied, his voice catching just slightly. The door clicked shut behind the last student, leaving the two of them alone in the soft hum of the overhead lights. She set down her papers, smoothed the front of her blouse, and leaned against her desk. "You've been quiet," she said, tilting her head. "Quieter than I expected." "I just prefer listening," he admitted. Her lips curved into a faint smile. "Listening is good. Observing is better. But eventually, you have to speak. Otherwise, people will never know what you're capable of." The air between them felt heavier now, though he couldn't have said why. She stepped closer, not enough to be inappropriate, but enough that he caught the faint scent of her perfume, something warm and almost spicy. "I think," she continued, "you're not here just for literature." His eyes flickered up to meet hers, startled. "What do you mean?" Her smile didn't waver. "You'll figure it out." Then she gathered her papers, brushed past him on her way to the door, and left him standing there, pulse racing. That night, he barely slept. He kept replaying her voice in his head, the subtle shift in her tone, the way she seemed to speak in layers as if there was always something just beneath the surface. The next week, he caught her watching him during class. Not often, not for long, but enough for him to notice. When their eyes met, she didn't look away right away, she let the moment linger. And then, 2 weeks later, something happened that would change the nature of their meetings entirely. "All right, let's keep going and finish part 1 so we get close to the 2,000-word target, keeping it slow burn, male-oriented, sensual, and still safe for YouTube." That night, the rain had started just as he reached the campus. By the time he pushed open the heavy wooden classroom door, his jacket was damp, and the smell of wet asphalt clung to him. Miss Charlie was already there, leaning over her desk, pen in hand, her hair falling forward in loose waves. She looked up and noticed the water dripping from his sleeves. "You're soaked," she said. Sit near the radiator before you catch a cold. Her voice was calm, but there was something in the way she glanced at him, brief, assessing. He did as told, sliding into the desk nearest the tall, hissing radiator in the corner. Class began as usual. She paced the room while speaking about the power of subtext in literature, how the real meaning was often hidden beneath what was said out loud. He couldn't help but think she wasn't just talking about books. Halfway through, she stopped at his desk. You, she said, gesturing with her pen. Tell me, what does subtext mean to you? He hesitated, the rest of the class turning to look at him. It's what's left unsaid, but still felt, he said finally. Her lips curved into that knowing smile again. Exactly. She didn't move right away. Instead, she rested her palm lightly on the edge of his desk. Some of us are better at reading it than others. It felt less like a compliment and more like a challenge. After class, as students were zipping up coats and shuffling out, she caught his gaze and tilted her head toward the door. Walk with me, she said. The hallway was dim, the hum of vending machines echoing down the corridor. She walked slowly, heels clicking on the linoleum. Do you ever write? She asked suddenly. Not really, he admitted. Why? You notice things, she said. Writers need that. And, she glanced sideways at him. You have patience. That's rarer than you think. They reached the front entrance. Outside, the rain had slowed to a mist, the street lamps casting pools of golden light on the pavement. She turned to face him. I have a small project I'm working on. A private workshop, if you will. Not part of the syllabus. He swallowed. And you want me to attend, she said simply. If you're interested. There was no mention of where or when, just the faintest curve of her smile before she stepped out into the mist and disappeared into the night. The next day, his phone buzzed with an email from her, not through the official school system, but from a personal address. Saturday. 7 p.m. Bring an open mind. No further details. Saturday came quickly. He found himself standing outside a narrow townhouse in a quieter part of the city, the street quiet except for the distant hum of traffic. The curtains on the second floor were drawn, light spilling through in a soft amber glow. He rang the bell. The door opened to reveal Miss Charlie, not in her usual blouse and skirt, but in a fitted black dress that hinted at curves in ways he hadn't seen before. Her hair was down, framing her face, and her eyes seemed darker, sharper. You're on time, she said approvingly. Good. Come in. The living room smelled faintly of sandalwood. Bookshelves lined the walls, broken only by framed photographs and a few abstract paintings. She gestured toward a leather armchair, then poured 2 glasses of wine without asking if he wanted any. This, she began, handing him a glass, isn't about grades, or assignments. This is exploration. You'll learn things here you won't find in a classroom. Her voice had dropped half a note, almost conspiratorial. And what do you want me to do? He asked. For tonight. She swirled her wine. Listen. Observe. And tell me what you see. She moved toward the window, the soft light outlining her figure, and for the first time, he realized just how different the setting was from the campus. Here, she wasn't Miss Charlie the teacher. She was something else entirely, someone who could guide, test, and maybe even control the pace of whatever this was becoming. His heart pounded, but he didn't look away. That was the night he understood the meaning of her earlier lesson. Subtext wasn't just part of literature. It was part of her. And she was about to teach him how to read it. He hadn't been sure what to expect when she'd said private workshop, but whatever was unfolding now already felt far beyond the boundaries of an ordinary meeting. Miss Charlie set her wine glass down and moved toward a low table in the corner of the room. It was covered in papers, leather-bound notebooks, and a few objects he couldn't quite make out, small, deliberate things, like a fountain pen, a silk ribbon, and what looked suspiciously like a black satin blindfold. She noticed his gaze. Curious. Yes, he admitted. Good. She picked up the ribbon and let it slide through her fingers before setting it back down. Curiosity is the first step. But it needs direction. She poured herself more wine but didn't offer him a refill. Instead, she leaned against the edge of the table. Tonight is about learning to see differently. Words are one way to tell a story, but so are reactions, silence, and control. The word control seemed to hang in the air. Before he could ask what she meant, there was a knock at the door. Miss Charlie glanced at him, her expression unreadable. Right on time, she murmured, and went to answer. A woman stepped inside, slightly younger than Miss Charlie, but with the same air of confidence. Her hair was tied back, her fitted jacket giving her a sharp, almost business-like appearance. She carried a slim leather folder under one arm. "This is Claire," Miss Charlie said, introducing her without breaking eye contact with him. "She's here to help." Claire's handshake was firm, her gaze lingering on him just a moment longer than necessary. They sat, Miss Charlie in her leather chair, Claire at the armrest, and him across from both of them, feeling as though he'd been summoned to something more than just a lesson. "Claire's role," Miss Charlie began, "is to push boundaries. Mine is to keep you from retreating too quickly." He felt a faint rush of adrenaline. "Push boundaries? How?" Miss Charlie exchanged a glance with Claire, almost like silent communication, then returned her attention to him. "You'll find out. But first tell us about the last time you truly felt out of your depth." He hesitated, then gave an answer, something safe, about a difficult project at work. They listened, but it was clear they weren't after corporate stories. Claire leaned forward. "What about a time you felt powerless?" The way she said it made the word powerless sound less like a weakness and more like an experience to be studied. He swallowed. "I don't know." Miss Charlie smiled faintly. "Then maybe it's time you learned." For the next hour, they didn't touch him, didn't even move too close. Instead, they spoke sometimes to him, sometimes to each other, about control, choice, and the art of withholding. About how desire often grew in the spaces where something was promised but not yet given. They asked him to describe what he noticed about the room, about them, about how it felt to be observed. Claire occasionally jotted notes in her folder, her eyes flicking up at him between sentences. By the time they were done, he felt oddly disoriented, as though they'd drawn something out of him without his realizing it. Miss Charlie walked him to the door. "Next week," she said, "we'll move from observation to participation." Her voice dropped just slightly on that last word, and it followed him all the way home. The week dragged by. Every conversation at work, every errand, every idle moment seemed to circle back to that night in Miss Charlie's living room. Her final word, participation, had planted itself in his mind and refused to leave. When Saturday came, he arrived earlier than the first time. The door was already unlocked, as if they'd been expecting him. Inside, the lights were lower, the air warmer, scented faintly with sandalwood and something darker, maybe clove. Miss Charlie was seated in the same leather chair as before, wearing a dark silk blouse and fitted trousers. Claire stood near the window, her arms crossed loosely, a faint smile playing on her lips. "You're early," Miss Charlie observed, her tone neutral. "I didn't want to be late," he said. "Punctuality is good," Claire added. "It shows discipline." Miss Charlie gestured toward the same chair he'd sat in last week. "Tonight will be different. No wine. No conversation about work. You're here to follow instructions." Her voice had lost its classroom softness. Claire stepped forward, holding a small black notebook. She opened it slowly, almost ceremonially, then looked at him. "Rule 1, she said. "You speak only when spoken to. Understand?" "Yes," he replied automatically. "Rule 2, Miss Charlie continued, "You do exactly as you're told, without hesitation. This is about trust." He nodded, pulse quickening. "Good," Claire said, closing the notebook with a soft snap. "Let's begin." They didn't start with anything physical. Instead, they tested him with stillness. Miss Charlie instructed him to sit, hands resting loosely on his thighs, eyes forward. Claire circled the room slowly, occasionally stopping behind him so close he could hear the faint rustle of her clothes. At first, it was easy. But minutes passed 5, 10 until the silence felt heavy. Every instinct told him to speak, to move, to break the tension. But he remembered the rules. "Good," Miss Charlie murmured finally. "You can hold your ground." Claire came to stand beside her. "Let's see how he does with direction." For the next half hour, they gave him small, deliberate tasks: move a book from one table to another, adjust a curtain, pour them each a glass of water without spilling a drop. Simple, almost meaningless acts, but under their watch, each felt like a test. They never raised their voices, never rushed him. But every time he hesitated, even for a second, Miss Charlie would tilt her head as though marking a point against him. When the final task was done, Claire took the notebook and scribbled something down. Then she looked at Miss Charlie. "I think he'll do." Miss Charlie rose from her chair, walked over to him, and rested a hand lightly on his shoulder. "Next week," she said, "we increase the pressure." On the way home, he realized something strange. He had done almost nothing that night, and yet his heart was racing as though he'd run miles. Whatever they were building, it was working. Saturday night. Same townhouse. Same low amber light spilling across the wooden floors. But this time, the door opened not to Miss Charlie, but to Claire. She leaned on the frame, looking him over. "You're right on time," she said. "Good. Follow me." The living room looked subtly different tonight. The chairs had been moved aside, leaving more open space. The low table in the corner was cleared except for a black satin blindfold and what looked like a small silver timer. Miss Charlie sat in her chair, legs crossed, wearing a fitted dark dress that seemed more suited to a private dinner than a class. She didn't greet him right away. Instead, she let her eyes travel from his face to his shoes, then back up again. "Close the door," she said at last. "And stand in the center of the room." He obeyed. Claire stepped behind him and set a hand lightly on his arm. "We're going to test your focus," she said. "And your patience." The blindfold was in her other hand. He hesitated for half a second, then remembered Rule 2. No hesitation. She slipped the blindfold over his eyes, adjusting it so no light slipped through. The scent of her perfume was faint, cool, sharper than Miss Charlie's warmth. "Stand still," Miss Charlie instructed. The next 10 minutes were a blur of sensations without sight. Footsteps moving around him. A faint rustle of fabric. The sound of a wine glass being set down. Once, Claire's voice near his ear, "Don't flinch." Something brushed his sleeve just enough to make him tense. Then silence again. The silver timer ticked in the distance, its steady beat amplifying the waiting. Finally, Miss Charlie spoke. "You lasted longer than I thought." The blindfold came off. She and Claire stood side by side now, both watching him with unreadable expressions. "Now," Miss Charlie said, "we'll add choice to the pressure." Claire brought over 2 identical envelopes and placed them on the table. "One contains an instruction from me," Miss Charlie explained. "The other, from Claire. You choose one. You complete it without question." He studied their faces, but neither gave away a hint of what might be inside. He reached for the envelope on the left. Inside was a small card with just 5 words, "Kneel. And wait for more." When he looked up, Miss Charlie's smile deepened slightly. The rest of the evening blurred into a slow, deliberate sequence of commands, simple, controlled, but each carrying weight under their watchful eyes. The kneeling wasn't about comfort or even submission, it was about focus, about stripping away the noise in his head until all that was left was the moment. By the end, his muscles ached not from exertion, but from holding still under their scrutiny. Miss Charlie walked him to the door again. "Next week," she said, "you'll stop being the only one under pressure." Claire's glance at her was quick, knowing. It was the first time he realized they weren't just training him. They were building something between all 3 of them. The following Saturday, the atmosphere felt different the moment he stepped inside. The townhouse was quieter than usual. No music, no clink of glasses, just the low hum of the radiator and the faint scent of sandalwood. Both women were already there. Claire stood near the bookshelves, flipping through a small black folder. Miss Charlie sat in her usual chair, but instead of her composed posture, she leaned back, watching him with an expression that was almost appraising. "Tonight," she said, "you won't be the only one being tested." Claire closed the folder and moved to stand beside him. "This time, we'll all take turns. You'll lead when told, follow when told, and," she glanced at Miss Charlie, "sometimes decide for yourself." It was the first time they'd given him any form of control. They began in silence, each of them watching the other. Miss Charlie instructed Claire to stand in the center of the room and hold a pose, shoulders back, chin up, while he walked around her. "Observe her," Miss Charlie said. "Notice details. What does she project? What does she hide?" He spoke slowly, carefully mentioning the precision in Claire's posture, the way her jaw was set, the slight restlessness in her fingers despite her stillness. Claire didn't react, but her eyes tracked him as he circled. Then it was his turn again. Claire handed him a chair and told him to sit while Miss Charlie stepped forward. She gave simple, precise commands: "Look at me. Lower your hands. Don't move." Each one felt deliberate, meant to see how quickly he could adapt. The shifts in control were dizzying, one moment obeying, the next directing, then surrendering again. After nearly an hour, Miss Charlie paused the exercise. "You've adjusted faster than I thought," she said. "Which means it's time for the final part." Claire retrieved the blindfold from the table. "You'll wear this," she told him, "but you'll be the one giving instructions." He hesitated. "How?" "You'll have to rely on sound," Miss Charlie interrupted. "And instinct." The next 10 minutes blurred into movement and voices. He couldn't see them, but he could sense where they were by the shift of the floorboards, the way the air moved when one of them stepped closer. He gave small, uncertain instructions: "Move left, stop there, face me," and heard them obey. Sometimes their voices overlapped, challenging him to stay steady. Sometimes they fell silent, letting the weight of his own decisions settle on him. When the blindfold came off, both women were standing closer than they ever had before. "You did well," Miss Charlie said softly. Claire's smile was sharper. "And you're not done." They didn't explain what "not done" meant. But as he left that night, the cool air outside hit his face and he realized something: the line between student and teacher, between leader and follower, between the three of them. It was gone. And whatever came next, it wouldn't be anything like the lessons he'd started with.